Good afternoon, everyone. Now is the most interesting segment of the day. Once you get settled, we can start with the most interesting segment of the day. So we have a panel on decoding AI for development, and we are very grateful to Jeanette Rodrigues for agreeing to moderate the panel. So Jeanette is the Executive Director, South Asia at Bloomberg News, where she leads coverage of one of the world's most strategically important and rapidly transforming regions. Based in India, she oversees Bloomberg's reporting on India and South Asia across business, economy, technology, geopolitics, and public policy. Over the course of her career at Bloomberg, Jeanette has reported exclusively on India's macroeconomic reforms, startup ecosystem, digital economy, financial markets, and corporate sector. Her reporting has closely followed key developments, including India's manufacturing ambitions, technology expansion, foreign investment trends, and others. Jeanette continues to play an influential role in shaping conversations around business, journalism, and economic storytelling in emerging markets. Over to you, Jeanette.
Thank you, Lenny. Well, when Lenny said that I agreed to moderate this panel, I jumped to the occasion, actually, because it's a very interesting panel. Conversations like these expand my horizons as well. And the biggest reason I chose to be here and participate in this discussion is because of the variety of voices that we have on the panel. It's not going to be a consensus by any stretch of imagination. So let's start with introducing all our people. I'm going to presume that most of you know Professors Ufuk and Professors James Evans, and we hope that they can bring in the global context to what we are discussing today. Along with them, we also have Dr. Somik Lall and Dr. Manish Gupta. If we could just take our seats. I'm going to presume, ladies and gentlemen, you'll know the first two seats here, and I'm going to skip over them on the introduction so we can dive straight into the discussion. Dr. Manish Gupta, sitting there, is Senior Director at Google DeepMind. He leads teams conducting research in AI across India and Japan. Then, of course, we have Mr. Deepak Bagla, a very, very interesting voice and very important to connect our discussions to the real world. Mr. Bagla, Deepak, as we'll call him on this panel today, is currently serving as the Mission Director for the Atal Innovation Mission Official. And the importance of having him on the panel is he was also heading Invest India. Today he heads the Atal Mission, connected to ground realities. And of course, Somik. A big round of applause for our panel before we start. Before we start, just to get a temperature of the room, our topic today, of course, is India's economic development in the context of AI and the changes coming in. Just to get the temperature of the room, how many of you think AI is going to be a good thing for India? How many of you think AI is the most terrifying happening for India? Excellent. I would love it if all of you all participate with your questions, because we have the people here who can help clarify all of these positions for you. Let's, just to give us some context around which way we want to go, we'll have about 60 minutes of a panel discussion, followed by audience questions. So please have your questions ready. And we will also go through one fundamental rule on the panel as we're having these conversations. It's a leaping off point from what James spoke about in his session, which is the usefulness of the technology. It's the usefulness of translating all of our discussions into the real world. The fact that he mentioned about the defense sector sponsoring the most disruptive ideas shows that only when there's applicability can we really have innovation. So, Ufuk, the first question to you. Historically, India has always benefited from this applicability, right? It was a very tangential applicability. India benefited by exporting talent. India benefited by exporting services to the world. We are in a world now where AI seems to reward ownership. Ownership of the people who own the compute, ownership of the people who own the large language models. Does that change the development story for India?
So I think that's a very interesting question. So when we look at these countries that haven't performed the way they should, so normally let me just be very approach the problem from outside the box. Normally, economic theory predicts that if an economy starts from a low income, they should grow much faster and they should catch up with the frontier economies. The theory is very loud and clear. Indeed, since Bob Solow, in 60s, this has been the predominant prediction. But when we look at the data, we don't see evidence. So normally, these economies who should be growing really fast relative to the US, they are not growing. And if anything, as Somik and I, we both showed in our presentations, the gap between frontier and emerging economies is preserved over time. So the main problem there is the lack of technology adoption. Normally, a country like India, where we may, according to the numbers, it's roughly 1 to 3% of the US, should be at a much better position. So yes, India provided certain inputs for the global market for sure. Globalization has, on the margin benefited India, but I think there is still a huge potential that remained unlocked, even with the previous setup. So that's why what I see AI doing is giving a key to unlock that existing potential. So the way I would like to think about an economy is first there's kids born, and then we selectively train a subgroup of them, and depending on which economy we are looking at, either there's a nationwide entrance exam or they apply to schools. We select a subgroup of them, we train them in technical schools, and then we provide them opportunities in the labor market. And if we don't, they leave the country, obviously. And then that's how we close the circle in a macroeconomy. AI is transforming all these aspects of it potentially, right? Even from the talent training, talent selection, and how we can train our talent, how we can create job opportunities as an entrant, as new applications, the way I also explained it. AI has the potential of transforming it. So that's why, rather than comparing it to how the economy used to run before, I would like to approach from a completely new angle. But then the question is, how should we think about India in this AI race? Or how should we think about any economy in this AI race? Should they, should emerging economies like Mexico, Turkey, or India, should they be thinking about head-to-head competition with the US by thinking about LLM models? Or is there more low-hanging fruits for these economies? And this is exactly where, first adopting the technology, and then, basically, adapting it to local conditions and then advancing it should be in stages. And this is what we, in our 2024 report, we referred to this as infusion of the idea first and then innovating on it as the stages. If a country don't follow these steps and try to do something already way above what it can do, then most of the time we see things not being helpful for advancing the economy. For instance, the key example, we also try to feature this in our report in 2024, was the comparison of Korea against Brazil. So Korea at the time went step by step, first adopting the technologies, absorbing it first, building the capability, and then building on it. And this step-by-step approach was very helpful for Korea. But at that step-by-step stage, infrastructure was important, but building scientific institutions and blending it with industry, creating this whole ecosystem was very critical. Whereas, then you see other countries like Brazil, for instance, where there was just, enormous amount of innovation support at the time. Most of those public money didn't translate into productivity gain or technology gain. So that's why I think, rather than focusing on the foundational layer, which is very much compute heavy and skill heavy, etc., where the entry barriers are really high, we have to first start thinking about the application layer, where the entry barriers are really low, and if the right complementary infrastructure is provided, then there are enormous business opportunities, and are enormous opportunities on the healthcare, on education, on many different fields. And during the coffee break, we had a fantastic conversation on this. So that's why, yes, when the time comes, of course, head-to-head competition with the US could be a conversation. But first, there are a lot of low-hanging fruits that can be unlocked, and I think that should be the priority. But there, I think, access to infrastructure is very, very critical. And here, let's just take an example of cell phones. With cell phones, we are accessing, AI very easily. But in many developing countries, cell phones are one of the heaviest taxed products. And this is exactly should be the opposite, but this is creating a barrier to accessing technology, and this already prevents people from using digital services, for instance. So that's why we have to just look at how what are the complementary infrastructure first, and how we can make it more broadly accessible to individuals. Once they have access to it, then thinking about the application layer, then ultimately foundation layer would be, I think, the way to go.
Ufuk, I hear you on the going systematic route. But going by the very example you mentioned, cell phones, India is a country that arguably leaped directly to cell phones. Many people in this country wouldn't necessarily have had a landline. So it's a country that takes some pride in leapfrogging technology levels. I'm not disputing your main argument, but at this point I want to turn to Manish and go to the heart of what you said, that maybe we don't necessarily need to go head-to-head with the US. But Manish, will India perennially be playing catch-up? What about countries with no large language models? Will they always merely be followers? Is that even a sustainable pathway to progress?
Yeah, so I'm going to vehemently disagree with this. I really enjoyed your talk. You made a lot of good points, but on this point specifically, I'm going to absolutely vehemently disagree. So let me start with 3 observations about AI models. The first is that they are really helping us solve what Demis Hassabis refers to as root node problems. Really, really hard problems, which once you solve them, you get unlock so many other solutions. So one example that we heard in your talk was, for instance, the protein folding, right, AlphaFold, which solved that grand challenge. But that's not the only one. There is work being done on unlocking fusion as a source of abundant clean energy, discovering new materials, new drugs, and so on, where AI is now poised to play a very, very powerful enabling role, right? So that's point 1. Point 2 is, in the past, if you go back 10 years ago, for any problem, you had to build a new AI model from scratch. And often these were built using these deep learning approaches and so on, but pretty much every problem required a specialized model. And we have gone to now this foundation model era, where now a single model, which is pre-trained on these large volumes of data, is now able to solve most of these problems better, either out of the box or sometimes with simple prompting that we call in-context learning. It's able to solve them better than those specialized models. So even if you want to solve 100 different applications, that if you don't invest in that one frontier model, you're behind the curve. Third, AI is a compounding technology. So increasingly, there are people, for instance, right here in India, in my team, who are now using AI models to improve the next generation of AI models. So if you wait for, India to, step by step, move up the value chain, the train would be long gone. So, and is it too late for us to catch up? No. Do we lack talent? Absolutely not. There's already work being done right here in India. So for instance, and it's not me saying it, Demis Hassabis made that point when a journalist in India asked him when he was here for the AI Impact Summit, he referred to work, thankfully, going on in our team, where he said there is all of this amazing world-class research being done on pushing the frontiers of these frontier models. So there is that capability. I think what we lack is that willingness to invest in research. I mean, what made DARPA, right, really famous at investing in those moonshots, in those DARPA hard problems. In India, just we haven't had that tradition of investing in research that is not guaranteeing you that ROI. And our companies famously don't invest much in research. They always want to only invest in ideas they are absolutely sure will give them that return on that investment. And you always are then bound to very incremental forms of advances, right, that way. So I think it's time for India to wake up and realize the potential that will come from investing in these breakthrough technologies. And in fact, some of that is beginning to happen. I mean, there are startups like Sarvam and so on, which are now beginning to build their own foundation models. But my view is that they need to, again, and there I would say, agree with the points that Ufuk made in his talk. They must not hide behind protectionism from whatever the Indian government. They must strive to be global players, right? So they really need to then not look for investments from just Indian government and so on. They should really strive to build the best models. And I think that's possible because there would be global venture money that will come to India if we have the right kind of entrepreneurs, right? And with the right level of ambition. Because today, there is enough venture money available to chase the right kind of disruptive ideas.
Are you thinking that they will be competitive to OpenAI, for instance?
Absolutely, they could be. I mean, there's nothing sacrosanct about OpenAI. I mean, OpenAI has not really done anything very novel. They basically use the transformer architecture, and it's like a lot of that kind of work, right, is being done across OpenAI, Google DeepMind, Anthropic. The Chinese models are not that far behind. They're just maybe 6 months to, or maybe 12 months at most behind. So it's not as if OpenAI is whatever, some crazy, whatever, amazing, untouchable place that you cannot. And there is more innovation to be done. Nobody has cracked, not OpenAI, not Google DeepMind, not Anthropic. Nobody has cracked the problem of true reasoning. How do you really effectively do reasoning? It requires some breakthrough. And what's there to say that an Indian researcher cannot come up with that breakthrough?
Well, we certainly have enough brain talent in a way to address that issue. There is, of course, Manish, the issue of core infrastructure.
Yeah, I just make the point that talent is there. I think what we need is more higher ambition and higher investments in research. Those are the two things.
I'll come back to that because we recently did, as Bloomberg News, we did a little tour of the country, and it's great to see some of the work happening in pockets, something that addresses that ambition. But first, James, to you. What matters more, according to your research? Owning these frontier models or having people that can use them creatively? Let's break up this problem, right, that we are speaking about on this progression chain.
I guess this is on. Yeah, I think we're trying to figure this out. I don't think anybody knows. This is there's a project that Ufuk and I have been working on called the Be Ready for AI Index that tries to figure out, okay, so to what degree is a country participating in frontier, artificial intelligence development? To what degree is a country teaching these skills to its students? To what degree is that country building startups in these spaces? To what degree are the job ads reflecting novel combinations of AI skills? So what's the link basically between production and consumption of AI across these spaces? And I think it's not obvious. But I will say, for example, so I spent a fair bit of time in China, probably 6 to 8 times a year. I'm there, I collaborate with folks. One thing that's interesting is this new academy movement. So in Shenzhen and in Shanghai and in Beijing just so not quite a year ago, so 11 months ago, they started basically all of these new academies. Each have, almost, I think the idea is like 1,200, 1,500 AI PhDs, basically, that are located across universities. There's no way that they can be absorbed into the academy. I mean, at the top level they can be, but where will they go if they don't go into the academy? They're going to go into industries that have not deployed AI in those contexts. They're going to go into mining, they're going to go into agriculture, they're going to go into these other contexts. So I think we are very likely to see, and we see some early correlations between basically kind of foundational advances and the ability to creatively think about consumption and context. But I think I think we're going to have to figure out. Obviously, if those two are loosely coupled, then there's a huge leapfrog opportunity. If they're tightly coupled, then there's not. And I think the jury's out. No one knows the answer to this question.
We are in a world where everyone's trying to figure it out, right? AI is a new technology, and we're all trying to figure out what's the best way to go about it. In the spirit of argument and figuring our way out, Somik, assuming India does want to compete at every level of this race, does it really have enough of the risk capital? What needs to be done there, and how do you see the landscape?
Great. Jeanette, great question. Both Ufuk and Manish started off with two different views on how they see AI. Ufuk's view is AI is a general purpose technology, like the steam engine or the internet, and it's very hard to leapfrog. And Manish made the point that AI has a bunch of layers, and countries, based on their capabilities, can actively pursue different leadership in different paths. Both are correct, right? Both are correct because what we are seeing is that the difference between AI and other general purpose technologies is the diffusion of AI is much faster than what we have seen before. So after the first kind of Gen AI program got out, within 6 months there was global diffusion. But that's at the very bottom end of the adoption kind of layer. So what countries are trying to do is to see whether there's competition in the data, in the hardware, in the models, in the applications, and etc. I care about AI being a fast tracker for development. To do things for, say, the Indian economy in 10 years, what would have taken 50 years? And that's what I care about, right? And right now what I'm seeing is there is an abundance of what we call pilots, but not great examples on scaling up. So we are very excited when we think about the Telangana case, about agriculture, about education, things in public affairs. There's better forecasting, right? So what I'm trying to see is it's not about the technology, which is proven, and Manish, you're absolutely right. We can kind of make advances on the technology, but the systems that enable diffusion of this technology. So later in a couple of months, the World Bank will be publishing the World Development Report on Artificial Intelligence. And there we identify 4 problems in scaling up the pilots. And these are about public procurement, because the procurement systems in most countries are designed to procure bricks and mortar. The value of that system is at delivery. But with AI, the value increases with discovery, with testing, adding. So we need more flexible procurement systems to scale up things that work. Second, folks, we get really enamored when we look at use cases. But the evidence of what works and what doesn't just hasn't been kind of carefully implemented. In terms of healthcare, there are about 500 research papers that are out there, but none tell you what's really important. So we need an experimentation mindset that tells us that. Third, I think it relates to what I call organizations. There are AI products there, but is the economy dynamic enough to absorb it? And here, Ufuk, the work you're doing on business dynamism really matters. If we have a very productive private sector, many more firms will be able to adopt AI use them in business processes. It's not enough to just use ChatGPT, but how do we make it systemic, right? And finally, Jeanette, coming to your point on financing. I know Manish is very positive. There's a lot of liquid equity money out there to support it. But most of financing that happens in emerging markets is debt financing. And that goes back to Manish's point that we are just not risk takers, right? If you have this real market for equity and you have this market for kind of venture capital, knowing that 9 out of 10 bets will fail, now that creates an appetite about trying out new ideas. So the model that I found really exciting was the Y Combinator model, which connects all these entrepreneurs to 3 things. To money, which is not the most important thing, but to mentors and markets. So in the 6-week crash course at Y Combinator, 90% of entrepreneurs are told, you shouldn't be here. You should be getting a job as a wage worker in the formal sector. And for the other 10%, how do I connect you to market opportunities? How do I lower the cost of capital to you? I think taking that together, we can think about procurement, evidence, organization, and financing to scale up these pilots.
Somik, I want to pick on the word scale there, because that really is the challenge for India. It's scalability. How do we apply technologies and innovations and also finance at scale? Before I go to Deepak, I want to talk about some real-world examples. I, of course, work with Bloomberg News. We are heavily finance-based as an organization, but our job is to talk about how countries are changing and where there are pockets of risk and opportunity for global investors to make or lose money. And we found, when I say we, I mean my colleagues and I, we found there's a very simplistic narrative being developed about India, that it is short AI, that it is short deep technology, that it is short oil, and that's extremely important in the current energy security situation, and that it is long coders. So we decided to investigate. We decided to investigate how true is this, and how deep does this argument go through. What we did is we spoke to a range of people. We spoke to investment bankers. We spoke to some deep tech startups. And there were 2 or 3 consistent messages that came through, right? One of course, was this investment banker in Bombay who held his head in his hands. I kid you not, he held his head in his hands and said, my headquarters is New York, and I feel his pain because my headquarters is New York. And he said, no one there is speaking anything outside of the LLMs and chips. That's the only language they know, and that's the only language of comparison that they use against any country. So it's hard to even break that frontier when we are speaking to them to talk about what's happening in India. Another person we spoke to on this tour was a very younger than 30 years old, right? He was a very young startup founder in Bangalore. And the question I asked him was, I have to say, doing world-first manufacturing, extremely bright, clearly very well-read and articulate. And I asked him, are any of the large conglomerates in India, the much-storied houses, helping you? And he literally pouted. He was like, that was his answer. You could see the despair. You could see the frustration there. You could see the humanity in his answer, that there is so much to be done. We spoke to an industry veteran who is leading one of the Prime Minister's big ambitions. And he spoke about how big business is not looking to invest money. So Deepak, coming to you with all of this backdrop, what should India invest in? There's a lot of optimism around pockets. The RFI fund, for instance, the work that's being done by the Prime Minister's office. But what should India invest in?
The answer on that is everything. But on a very simple thing, if I may start first. You were talking about the globalization and India's ability on that. Last year, 40% of our startups which got angel funding had global business models. Now, please remember one thing. We are one of the youngest democracies in the world. So sometimes, you pair us up. We are an ancient civilization. But as far as that is concerned, please remember we're just about a few 70, 75 years old. And within that, with the kind of complexity and scale which is coming in, the second element of India, and which is where you were asking me to do it, it's at so many multiple levels across multiple generations. Delhi itself, you sit down here in the metro, within 20 minutes, you would have moved 500 years. Jama Masjid, etc. You should do that, by the way. Within 20 minutes, you'll move across 500 years. What I'm just trying to say is that, one, we've got to look at it at multiple levels. Two, I go to Sovik's point. For us, technology is about people, inclusion and empowerment. I don't think AI is a race. It's a journey. And I think the race is where we just look at it during the course of its transition. Eventually, we are looking at cost curves being impacted. People get impacted, economies get impacted when cost curves drop. And I think that is where, because of the diversity, the scale of the data which we have and the scale itself, we see a faster drop of cost curves in the Indian context than multiple other economies on the planet. And that is where has been our strength when we talk about leapfrogging. Add
The
to that
frugality of it, you mean? The frugality of it.
Not just the frugality, how we leapfrog very fast from one technology to another, one level of development to another. What we are hoping there to happen, and that is what is happening because of the level of adoption and adaptation, both, which India has and an Indian has. And I think that is one of our biggest strengths. What that is leading us to is that this entire divergence in levels of development are coming in closer, hopefully. So today we are talking of not just 4 centers of growth, but we are talking of 56 centers of growth. The smaller cities coming up, and it moving to that. So eventually, hopefully, that is what we are wanting to make it happen. On the funding of technology, see, look at, no development in the world was funded only on global capital. Global capital can bring you 10 to 15% of the capital. It's only the marginal aspect. It's always your domestic capital. Look at our domestic household balance sheet. It's about $11 trillion. It's a huge balance sheet sitting there. You're one of the largest owners of gold in the world, as you know that. That is now going to start getting unlocked when we are moving away from our traditional forms of investment into gold and land into other areas. And what you're saying, so when you were talking about startup funding coming in form of debt and not equity, you see, high-level risk capital in equity comes only after a certain economic development. Typically, it is at about when you have a 5,500 per capita income plus, you start seeing a larger capital of risk capital, personal risk capital moving into it. Look at the US example. Personal risk capital, patient personal risk capital was the one which is leading this entire deep tech race to begin with. From the government side, it was getting orders. Am I going too long?
Go on.
What we are now trying to see also how we can absorb the technology within the system and innovation and getting new ideas. So I think we have started, we are on that journey. You're beginning to see that happen. You're seeing a large number of startups being funded in the evening by our own colleagues. And that has now become something which is what is taking off the race. Just imagine, just in 3,500 days, remember Startup India was launched in January 2016. In 3,500 days, you're number 3 in the world in number of unicorns. You're number 2 in the world in number of startups. You're number 1 in the world and the number of new startups adding every day. The beat is well. Just in 3,500 days. So to answer your question, how things change fast, in the Indian context, they are disrupted so rapidly that they're changing at a completely different level. Do not ever discount that part coming from the Indian elephant.
Deepak, I want to stick with that thought, and you can blame James for the wording of my question. I don't know if you were in the room when James said that when an incumbent idea dies, or when a scientist pushing an incumbent idea dies mysteriously and suddenly, there's a lot of disruption. What needs to die in India for the spurt of disruption to happen?
In the Indian context, nothing ever dies. It always remains in existence.
That's what we
That's
spoke
how
about.
is the circle of life, right? The idea will reach its top and then it'll come bottom and it comes back in another form. So the way we look at it, is a little different, that we don't see death in that idea. But the point does remain that the relevance of an idea comes back in several forms. And I think a large number of ideas for us, for example, frugality, which is not just an idea, but it's not just a choice, but it's a reality for us. And you know, one of the things which we are trying to do, by the way, the Atal Innovation Mission is now the world's largest grassroots innovation mission. I have fascinating ideas coming from kids in those schools from the villages. Week before last, Phoenix, Arizona has, every year they hold the championship for the world's, this is the world's largest, where they pick up youngsters from across the globe, and this time they had some 99 countries. One of our youngsters from a small place in Rajasthan was one of the biggest awardees. The only thing they did, they had a geometric design on a drainage which pulls in. So because of all these floods which used to come in their villages, those kids in the 9th grade from a small government school designed that. It takes the water in much quickly. Cheap, effective, frugal, easy to execute. And now it is being taken right across the global south.
Deepak, I love what you did there. Really brought it to the real world, right? Talked about what real world work is happening. And also there's a truth in what you said. Everything in India lives in the quantum realm, right? Everything exists at the same time. It's what we make of it. So Manish, going back to you, can you share examples of what you're seeing in your lab, what you're seeing in the sphere that you work in? What are the interesting ideas coming out there?
Yeah, so when I was asked to start this new research team for Google, I joined Google 6.5 years ago. I mean, the big question, I mean, if I looked at any area of AI, right, there were already like amazing researchers, leaders, right, elsewhere within Google research, right, doing that work. So we very naturally picked certain themes where we felt being in India would give us a certain unique perspective. And thankfully, it has worked out well for us, and of course, for Google. So one of the things we saw was this, in India, we have such diversity of languages, cultures. So, and we saw there was a big gap between the capabilities of these AI models on languages like English versus most other languages of the world. And so as we started doing that work and so on, not only did we improve capabilities for the Indian market to the point that you were making, I mean, we saw big gains from European, our own products in European markets, because certainly we were looking at things from a very different lens. Because in the US, you always think of the user as understanding one language. In India, inherently, we start with the view that people are multilingual. And it turns out that in many other parts of the world, especially Europe, people are multilingual. So some of the work that we did ended up with, and today, the overall lead for Gemini is our frontier model. The overall lead for Gemini internationalization is a person called Partha Talukdar, who sits in Bangalore. He has teams in Mountain View, Zurich, and so on, reporting to him. He sits in Bangalore because of the work that he did. Initially, driven by the diversity of Indian languages, we were also amongst the first to talk about that these models not just need to understand different languages, they need to understand different cultures, because they must not come up with the response first in English and simply translate that into the local language. They must come up with the response rooted in the cultural context of the user. So that's one example. Deepak referred to frugality, right? So we Indians just tend to be very frugal in nature. So it's very natural that a lot of work on making these models much more efficient. Because if we wanted to make Gemini serve Indian over 1 billion users in India, it wouldn't work, right? If like you applied the same, I mean, unless you made them far more efficient. So again, a lot of the leading work that has made the AI models much more efficient has come out of our team in Bangalore.
Can you give us examples, Manish?
So one example is something called Matryoshka representation learning, which was initially developed for these embedding models, pre-LLM era, which then we extended to LLMs. So the idea and the reason for the name Matryoshka is just like those Matryoshka nested dolls. We build these models in a nested manner. that you train the model once, let's say a 16 billion parameter model, and when trained in that Matryoshka style, that 16 billion parameter model also has embedded inside it a 8 billion, 4 billion, 2 billion, 1 billion parameter model. And not only that, the automatically derived, let's say 4 billion or 2 billion parameter model works actually better than if you were to train that 4 billion parameter model independently because of.
So it's an efficiency improvement.
It's both efficiency, yeah, significant efficiency gains. It's like introducing this element of elasticity. It was originally developed for these embedding models. We first developed it, we published papers at this NeurIPS conference and so on, and it was very funny. Like a year after we had published that work, there was this tweet from OpenAI, the company that you cited for its amazing innovation. Oh, we have this amazing, fantastic innovation that we have this model, instead of a fixed embedding, it uses variable embeddings depending where the number of bits changes depending on the complexity of the problem and so on. Amazing innovation that has come from us. And then there were sarcastic videos. Oh, you're referring to Matryoshka representation learning that was invented again by people like Prateek Jain sitting out of Bangalore. And a day later, a tweet from OpenAI, oops, sorry about the oversight. Indeed, we were talking about Matryoshka representation learning. So that's one example, but there are many more of really both efficiency and now improving the thinking capabilities, improving continual learning, which is coming out of our teams because of the necessity. I mean, if you want to serve 1 billion plus people in India and this region, you've got to make things far more efficient.
Manish, could I ask you for
Can I just throw in one follow-on, which I think is related to this work, and I think suggests that kind of the fundamental international nature of the work is that if you take the same model that's just trained on English or Chinese, and then you basically reinforce it in reasoning against a class of problems, and then this has been shown, at least 20 times, and I'm sure your group has been among those. And if you have a multilingual model that you reinforce to learn or to reason in English, right, with the same parameter set and the same reinforcement budget, effectively, the multilingual model will reason better in English. And one of the reasons why our group recently kind of pulled out is that, if you have, like, for example, concept A and concept B in English, but, in Hindi or one of the many other languages, you have basically a tessellated set of concepts that bridge them, it actually bends together the possibility of, so in some sense, there's translational capacity, there's frugality, but there's also the fact that the world's many pathways, like put together, effectively facilitate something that's not even a language. It's like a langome, through which we can reason continuously much better than we could without those endowments.
And that thought about following the different neural pathways to get different answers. Manish, if you could give me bullet point answers here. What are the root mode problems that you think we could solve here in India with the kind of research happening?
Oh, so many. I mean, let's say materials that will, have the appropriate properties. We need to find cures for all of the different cancers. Like things like, let's say, sources of clean energy, right? Green hydrogen, for instance, people keep talking about as like could be a game changer, but we still haven't figured out a way to create it inexpensively. So there's no shortage of really, really interesting. And even, I mean, I would even say, like, ultimately helping with the personalized learning of each child in the country, helping each person become healthy and stay healthy. Those are also, by no means, these are also very, very exciting, fascinating root node problems.
I know a lot of progressive politicians who are very excited by the idea of having a teacher for every Indian, a doctor for every Indian. Certainly problems that need to be tackled. James, if AI really will augment research, if AI will lead to more scientists or a better scientist, a better doctor, a better researcher, how well positioned is India to benefit? I want you to go back to some of the research that you've done, speaking about the short-term research in India has actually declined significantly. How well positioned are we given the realities, to benefit from these clusters that Manish spoke about?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges is just, so everyone's looking for personalized education and personalized medicine, but it's true that the unique environmental conditions and the unique, genetic endowments that, create disease in one context are fundamentally different from another. One of the things that was striking, for example, there was a long time, probably 50 years in the US, where there was the sense that effectively contagious disease had been solved, and that we only needed to just send out, Western solutions to the kind of, the rest of the world, and that they would solve these problems. And I'll just give you one example. There was a very small, non-sophisticated trial on the relationship between, for example, hydration and sepsis. That basically suggested that there was a positive association between the decrease of the likelihood of sepsis, which is this kind of full bacterial bloom that often results in death, and then only in, I think, 2008 did they run a full trial in Africa across a number of different nations, and discovered that this 50-year solution was systematically killing kids. So basically, if you were under, 16, then the likelihood that, so even though we thought there was this knowledge that was kind of robust, it was never retested and didn't need to be retested in this US environment. It never, so there's a whole host, I would say, of problems, inventive, health-oriented, and other problems, which are truly unique to these contexts and only will be discovered and discoverable by those who are local to those problems. So I think certainly in the context of health and personalization and local invention and local entrepreneurship, I think these things are all places where we could see transformative growth for things that are common to the human condition. I think it's not at all obvious that we're not going to see winner-take-all dynamics. And so I think this is something that we need to find ways to facilitate investment. It's not just the amount of capital. It's a public, for example, acceptance of the willingness to engage in failure, which is political fodder, basically, to take down administration. So I think finding ways to engage in public education surrounding some of these kinds of dynamics, which are critical to thinking about risk and risk capital, they're not just going to come because we decide that they're useful. I mean, these are deep cultural tropes. And they take decades,
Very quickly, Deepak and Somik, both of you, what is India doing to encourage risk and break these cycles that James was speaking about as potential problems?
Essentially on multiple levels, Jeanette. One is there's a very natural growth pattern that the moment you keep moving up the economic status, you start getting more money coming into this. We're beginning to see that happen. So we have over about 100 million already individuals who have the power to fund from their own. We're starting to see that capital coming in, large amount of that capital, and you will start seeing more of it coming in. Second is the entire mindset now which is coming towards that. It's a mindset essentially which gets a society to make it happen. And that change has already begun. The government and policy making, obviously I gave you the startup example. It's a great example. It's actually a business case, school case study on how policy and execution of policy can have such a great impact, both on scale and the pace at which it is impacted in such a short period of time. So I think there's a multiplicity of factors, and you are beginning to see that capital flow coming in where required.
Somik, how would you answer the same question?
So India's right now at $2,700 per capita. We want to be $13,000 or $15,000 as Viksit Bharat most broadly defined by 2047. So the question is whether AI is going to accelerate our trajectory there, or we first need to reach about $5,000, $7,000 before all the capabilities are realized. So in many things, the Indian investments in foundational skills and learning is really useful because it accelerates them. And India's investments in infrastructure are really helping us. My main concern is about regulatory environments that make it difficult for productive businesses to grow and for underperforming businesses to exit. But then I want to come to Manish's point, and a number that really bothered me is that if we are developing new customized models and advancing the frontier models, our most talented people are moving somewhere else. And the only statistic I saw, monthly statistics in terms of net migration of patent filing innovators, India is by far the world's biggest outflow of talent. Now, how do we create the conditions at home so that these people find it much more valuable to do these things at home rather than doing these talents abroad? So that, to me, the allocation of talent, the connecting to other diaspora talent, I think is going to be really fundamental. It's at the talent cultivation and harnessing where India really needs to think through.
And I suspect, Somik, that point is also the point that the people who raised their hands who said AI should terrify India. I think that's also the point that they are kind of alluding to. I think I'm on the right track there.
But there I would also point out that India at this point, I don't know if it's number 2, it's at least number 3, probably I think it's number 2 in terms of the number of AI, whatever, skilled people. And these are people with fairly deep level of skills. I still agree with the basic point that we need to create better conditions, right, for some of our top talent, because even from some of the VCs that are in India, we've been hearing the moment some of these AI firms really take off, they really advise those entrepreneurs to move to the Bay Area to kind of grow them to the next phase. And we have seen many such examples of companies that started in India, grew like to close to $100 million annual revenue rate and so on. There have been a few, and the first thing kind of these companies were asked to do was move to the Bay Area.
Again, harking back to the point, right? I think the one thing that needs to die in India is the willingness to let our companies die. The willingness to accept failure, the willingness to break a system that's not working and possibly create it again. For creative destruction, right? That's your specialty. The reality also is, while Somik spoke about the ambitions of becoming Viksit Bharat, developed India by 2047, the reality today is that we are a country of small businesses. Again, I think that's the point that terrifies a lot of people here. We are a country that exports talent, and we have a lot of faceless workers in India. Based on your work, are we underestimating the disruptions being caused by AI, or are we overestimating it?
So first, I think, the answer to your question is also tied to, what I tried to say earlier, which, I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm not saying that, AI cannot benefit India. To the contrary, I think India is one of the first countries where AI offers huge potential from many different angles. And I'm also not necessarily saying that, there should be no LLM effort. If private sector is willing to invest in LLM, of course, that's totally fine. But, and I also didn't say that, OpenAI is the most amazing innovation. Let me also be clear for the record. I just made an observation that 90% of small businesses in the US are using OpenAI products. And there's a reason why OpenAI emerged in the US, basically, right? So now, when we look at data systematically, I just want to proceed with data, basically. So what I see is that, first, firms are not scaling up. That was just a fact, basically. Firms in India are not scaling up. They stay small. Second, when we look at the exit rates, exit rate is much higher in the US than in India. It's just there's no exit, so there's no selection, basically. The economy is not lifting up the creative entrepreneurs, transformative entrepreneurs in the economy. Another interesting study, which, due to lack of time, we didn't go into it, but I try to emphasize that what should predict firm size should be the productivity, period, right? Productivity should predict firm size. In India, there's a study, it's not me, don't blame me on this, but one of the best predictor of firm size in India is the size of the family of the owner, or to be more precise, number of male children of the business owner. Now, in an environment like this, what should we prioritize? And in addition, another important complaint, normally successful growing economies are attracting a lot of FDI, right? China attracted a lot of FDI, Korean case attracted a lot of FDI. When you look at, one of the main complaints for foreign direct investment is, for instance, power outages in the case of India, for instance. Now, if power outage is not at the same scale as other countries, then how can, the small businesses, which is a lot of them, can utilize the AI tools? So now, government is going to, every policy is a choice. I wish we had infinite resources and we support everything. We can build everything, whatever we want. But now let's go to South African case. What should South Africa do? I showed you the numbers. Let's just think about those graphs. Should they work on their LLM? Right? So I'm not saying that LLM should not be a goal, but there are pecking order of issues. So with the right policies, finance can be attracted. Okay, with the right policies, you can draw finance into any country. But with the right policies, a lost group of talents cannot be brought back. So if we are not giving an equal chance to talents when they are 18, 19, 20, when they become 50, 60, we cannot bring them back in life and then retrain them, give them access, etc. But there are a lot of talents that are far away in different parts of the country. They should be prioritized. For them, access to infrastructure should be prioritized. For them, first first AI applications should be prioritized. That way, the talent can be nurtured. That way, small business owners can be also, there are a lot of small business owners who can create much more productive practices if they are given the opportunity. So that's why, again, I don't want to be misunderstood. AI is offering enormous opportunities, but every policy is a choice and it has consequences too, because we are living in a general equilibrium world. If you put resources here, there will be less resource for there, and then there has to be a pecking order of policy priorities, and that's all I'm trying to say basically. And that's why it has to be a healthy dialogue where everybody should bring their ideas, of course, in order to see where the biggest return is and then build on it.
Before I open it up for audience questions, Deepak, I was speaking to an entertainment mogul recently, and he told me something interesting, which harks back to what Ufuk said. He said, whatever terrible things you'll want to say about the IPL, remember that it is the country's best source of talent acquisition. It crawls, it goes to every corner of this country and finds the young kids, and that is why viewership stats jump by 8 million every time Vaibhav Suryavanshi comes up to bat. He said, who would have found Vaibhav Suryavanshi in this country if we did not have a mechanism? And I know the country has various views about the IPL, but do not dismiss it as a talent-finding mechanism. Going by the same parameter, how does the government decide in a place where the government is funding a lot of this innovation? How do you decide what will fail and what needs to be nurtured?
You're actually not looking to see where it'll fail. What you're trying to see is to create those multipliers. And how to see, and it's very outcome oriented, by the way, every time. So I have a fixed budget from the parliament. But every time I need to issue a check, there is an outcome-based statement which goes with it, which is now monitored very actively. See, one very interesting thing which has happened in India, I would say in the past 10 years, and what I talk about, do I have a minute for that, is the stack. When you have the telephone, when you have the mobile and the internet, just imagine 1 billion on the net, etc. For the first time in our history, you are seeing India being able to come together in the sense of empowerment, participating in the growth of India, and taking away the benefits from the growth of India. So one of the fastest growing industries in India in the past 3 years is the microfinance industry, 86%. What it is growing on, Ufuk, you see close to 40 to 45% of my GDP, or 33% of my GDP, 45% of my exports, are coming from my MSMEs, the small enterprises. We have about 75 million of them. Entire Europe, just to put it in perspective, is 32 million. That is our engine of growth. Now, that MSME used to be borrowing money at anywhere between 22 to 30%. Today, with technology, we have the access to reach out to them, and they are today getting that same capital, working capital, at 14 to 16%. Those are the multipliers which you are working towards to see how we can keep magnifying those and multiplying those and keep looking. One of the most interesting things of the policy making today is there's a lot of to and fro with the stakeholders. And there's a lot of re-evaluation which is happening because things are changing very rapidly. That is helping us in this entire process.
Thank you, Deepak. In the interest of fairness, Ufuk, do you have any closing comments to Deepak before we open up to the
No.
audience?
I think, exactly, I completely agree with Deepak's point that, SMEs are offering an opportunity here. So AI combined with these, myriad of SMEs here can create a huge value. That's all I'm saying basically for India. Yeah.
Can I just throw one thing in here? One part of this disagreement is, if you have frontier work that enhances the value of getting access to people across the whole country, if you have access to people across the whole country, it dramatically increases the multiplier for doing some frontier work. So I think in some ways, the country needs its own portfolio, of places where it's adopting, places where it's leading. And if it can't transit between. So I think in some ways,
yeah. And absolutely. And I think your argument might make sense for South Africa, but look at India. India is a much bigger economy. It's a $4 trillion plus economy. And AI is going to play a key role, right, in jump starting, right, all these small businesses and so on. So there's a very easy case in my view, right, for India to also not just invest in application of AI technology to, again, deliver all of this value, but also the basic foundations. Because there, again, in fact, Shiv Kalyana Raman was head of NSF, ANRF was recently quoting Shah Rukh Khan, picture abhi baki hai. We haven't seen the final word on what AI technology. So there is still a lot more innovation to be done. And there's absolutely no reason, right, for India not to participate.
And I think everybody here in this room will agree that India offers the large scale level problems, right, that we can attack. Deepak.
Just one point on this one. And this was an interesting one which came up at Davos the other time. The real story, think about it, when is it you started hearing of China out there? Or when it came onto the discussion table every morning? Jack, you would say, around 2009, 2010? Am I right? More or less. On the global table. You obviously are an expert. You've been there.
1998 is when they started investing.
Right. But 2009-10 is when it came onto everyone's conversation table across the globe. One big element which started happening with China then, from 2009 to 2018, every year they added $1 trillion to their GDP. That big inflection point comes when that change happens. Now look at us when we are getting ready there. Our 4th trillion came in about 3.5 years. Our 5th trillion will be about 3 years. Our 8th, 9th, it could move by 1 or 2, trillions will start every year. That is the time when you will see that huge hockey stick inflection point with all these elements coming in together. You'll add $1 trillion every year to your GDP.
Deepak, the panel was going on perfectly without anybody naming China. You ruined it. Let's go to the audience now. If I could request you, if you could direct your question at one of them, because that could get the most value probably for your answer.
So I got the mic. Am I audible? Okay. So this is Rajesh. I'm from the University of Chicago Booth School. I'm a tech, entrepreneur, come helper to a lot of organizations from the tech side, especially from the payment side of the world. So this is something to do for the Indian audience here, for the NPCIs and the worlds. Here's my question. There's been recently a few comments which came from the industry stalwarts, clearly mentioning that India could possibly have missed the AI bus. Now, having all spoken about the LLMs in the context that we're talking about, we really do not have any big LLMs at this point of time. And I don't know whether we're in the process of getting one, if somebody's thinking about that. From a slightly different perspective, for the market hegemony, it's very important that India is a counterbalance to the Chinese, and he's got the China perspective here, that we at least get a large share of the pie of the AI story, specifically from the LLM side. So what's the views on this? I think
Maybe I can start. No, yeah. India hasn't missed the bus. I mean, if you look at, another part that we didn't talk about during the panel was even the GCCs, right? The Global Capability Centers. If you look at any Fortune 500 company, right? A lot of their AI work of making these, especially the non-tech companies, making them AI ready, making them exploit, right? The retail stores, the Walmarts, the Targets and Lowe's of the world, right? How do you make them utilize AI? A lot of that work is actually happening out of India, right? In their global capability centers. So I completely disagree that, India has missed the AI bus. I mean, people make a lot of these headlines seeking statements. There is, yes, I mean, there's absolutely undeniable that India ought to be doing a lot more, right? In terms of at the forefront, in terms of AI research. If you look at the number of high impact research papers that are published out of India in AI, it's way below US and China. If you look at, again, the capabilities of these LLMs, and at least now we are beginning to see LLMs out of companies like Sarvam and so on, out of India, yes, it is well below what some of the global leaders like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google DeepMind, and so on, right, are building. But it is beginning to happen. So I wouldn't say, India has missed the bus, because a lot of, again, the work in AI would be ultimately in making AI real, right? Making it apply for solving real world problems. And India is full of problems. India is full of people who are passionate about solving these problems. So I think you will see a lot of very, very impactful work in AI happening out of India. It's already happening, but you'll see a lot more over the coming years. And my other prediction is in maybe after 2 or 3 years, I think your study probably was maybe done a bit earlier, where you say 90% of those users are using OpenAI. I'm going to see to it that with the work that, for instance, my own team does in India, many more of those would be hopefully using Gemini models instead of OpenAI.
I would add a bit of nuance to what Manish said, I think, and I will call this a problem. I think a lot of the problems that India faces is a lot of the work that we do is faceless. For example, even in chip design, there's a lot of work. I would argue that not a single chip goes out without an Indian imprint. But because the IP does not belong to India, nobody knows the work is done here. Yes, it's probably a failure of the media as well in the country, but there is a lot of faceless work that's happening. The trajectory for me, I think the frontier for me is when that becomes recognized, when we have the Ramanujan of AI, when we have the boss of AI.
There are over 1,000 chip designers for Google chips sitting in Bangalore. Over 1,000 chip designers.
The gentleman right beside you, please, in the pink shirt.
Oh, sure. Oh, sorry. My question is for Deepak. So space is one sector that comes to mind in the context of India's ability to scale up and build global world-class solutions, frontier research. If that is a use case, reference point, what in your view can be the learnings or takeaways for India in the context of what we are discussing around AI, frontier labs, research? If you can deliberate.
That's a very interesting example you gave, because if you really look at it, how India on the frontier side has really excelled itself in many ways, or not say excel, but right up there on the space of it. What you've now seen happen in the past 5 years especially is a complete focus on that sector. So the number of startups, we today have about 1,300 going up to 1,800 now, which is happening. And they're doing some very interesting work. You know, we've just funded ourselves, the Atal Innovation Mission, one of them. And I think you already started seeing capital coming into that place. And this is long-term patient capital on the space side. So when we are talking about the flow of capital coming to where ideas have relevance, and it is being backed by policy, you're beginning to see the results on that one. And I think that is definitely one of the areas on the frontiers which we are focusing on very actively. By the way, I must tell you, space, because of that, and because you just had somebody who went into the space, what was the name? I'm sorry. Subhanshu Shukla. So we just did a hackathon. Do I have 2 minutes on that? I just wanted to see the power of the platform, and I was telling you about it. We just did a hackathon in October, and we just got Sudhanshu Shukla as one of the faces for that. It was all what you wouldn't have heard about it because it was just on the social media. Week before last, the Guinness Book of World Records has recorded it as the world's largest hackathon. 200,000 prototypes. There was a young kid, you know, on a Saturday morning, I was sitting in my prayer. The phone rang, I didn't pick it up. 3 times it rang. I picked it up the 3rd time. There was a kid at the other end. He said, "Sir, I'm calling you from Jhajjar." He spoke in Hindi. Jhajjar is a small village kind of thing in Rajasthan. He said, "The problem which I have, that I want to submit 3 prototypes. One of them is a space-related thing. My teacher is letting me submit only 1. You know, guys, think of that 9th class kid from a village, from a government school, getting my mobile number, calling me and asking for this. And one of his solutions was on this. You know what was the other solution? His mother was extremely unwell, and the hospital was next to the highway, and the window was broken. So there was a lot of noise all the time. They lost the mother. He's come up with a solution, which is a circuit breaker that 200 yards from where they are, they can switch it on, nobody can blow a horn. This is a 9th class kid. We do not realize this movement is bottom up from each and every, it is being propelled by those kids. And when you talk of frugality, that kid does not have electricity in his school. He still goes to this little innovation cell which we've created in that school to create it. And you know how many prototypes I've got now? Just out of this hackathon, 209,000 across 4 sectors.
I agree with your point about space tech being this inspiring thing, because I was visiting IIT Madras. I was like part of this review committee. And as part of that, and I was talking to students, I felt like using Hindi words. Ke chullu bhar pani mein doob maro. You BTech computer science students. That I mean, just to explain in English, that you should be ashamed of yourself. Look at what your brethren from these other technology, engineering disciplines are doing, the kind of companies they are creating. Because most of if you look at today, the Indian computer science graduates from IITs, most of them end up joining these algorithmic trading and all these firms just because they're offering all that money and kind of not, in my view, kind of, it's like a complete bhed chal. So there is also a need for us to, I think, take inspiration from all these amazing entrepreneurs who are doing this.
Watch the space. Bloomberg News will be publishing a piece on the Indian space sector. Very, very exciting work happening there. But again, with my purpose here being to collide the real world with the ambition, Operation Sindoor, the recent India-Pakistan war, actually catalyzed a lot of this. Because the Chinese, if we speak to the Indian military, the Chinese apparently helped the Pakistanis with satellite detection. And there's a lot of now, again, going back to James's research, the Indian military is funding a lot of the space tech. They are becoming the first buyer for a lot of the space tech. So there's a lot of real world colliding with applications again in this space. Gentlemen, the picture for real this time.
So I'm skeptical, so I have a question for you. And, we have this illusion or delusion in our country that technology will come from high heavens and solve our problems and make us an affluent country. But, if the state's primary purpose is extractive and not productive, it's not going to change anything. We still have to go half a dozen times to the road transport office to get a license made, such a petty thing. So if AI is merely an instrument, it's not going to, in the morning we were talking about talent and merit. Our bureaucracy has people of most wonderful talent, but their actual output in productivity indices, we are probably the worst in the world. So, talent and merit can be put to repressive use. It can be put to productive use. AI is only an instrument. It's not going to transform things radically. Electricity arrived 100 years ago, but 90% of the country still doesn't get 24 into, whatever electricity. So it's, forgive me, I remain skeptical.
Deepak, do you want to address that? Because there is a
No,
layer
we
of
have
truth to
multiple
that.
challenges. We are coming, I told you we are a young, the reason why I gave you this example, sir, and many of your points are correct. The reason why I gave you this is that there is a new India emerging. Whenever you're at an inflection point, either in your life or as in a society, there'll be many stories of the past, and there'll be a few stories of the future. You will be the stories you adopt. All what I'm bringing here is some of the stories of the future which we are beginning to see. If that youngster from that village has the ability to call me and request for this from a village, it is inclusion and empowerment. The moment you start seeing inclusion and empowerment at that level, I think momentum starts developing. And, one very interesting thing, year before last, one of the Western ambassadors was in his farewell speech in Delhi, and he was going back, and somebody asked him, so what is it which you can bring about as a criticism of India? He said, the problem in India is that you guys do it so much yourself, you don't give others a chance to let it happen. And I think a large part of that remains true, that at times we get so caught up on that we forget that there is a new element emerging and we need to support it.
Deepak, if I could be a little combative on that, I think the child calling you up is a system failure, not a system success, because it means a process is not working. A child shouldn't have to call one of the top bureaucrats in the country to fix a problem. So going back to this gentleman's point, if I can be glib, and forgive me for this, a lot of, when we talk to real India, when we talk to people in the villages, when we talk to people in smaller towns, even in Bombay and Delhi, they tell us what needs to die in India, and pardon me for using this analogy, is the bureaucracy. How will we disrupt this? How will we get past ancient, you were talking about space tech. One of the space tech founders told us when he wanted to test his equipment, he had to run rings around the bureaucracy, nothing happened. It was only when he leapfrogged and went straight to the PMO that he got ISRO to open its doors to him. So it is a real problem. It is a real problem.
Definitely it has been a challenge. All what I'm saying is we are gradually seeing some elements of it which are taking it away or easing it in many ways. And I'll give you, if I have a minute, I'll give one example. So we've started a single window. In my previous job, I was also responsible for Make in India and Startup India. What we've started a single window. That means if you want to start an entity, you don't have to go to multiple offices with multiple papers. It's a portal. You come onto that. It asks you a few questions. You submit all your details only once. And then it just keeps going right into the system itself to get all the approvals. The interesting thing is this is the first step. So it takes away the interface. The second step is you will then start seeing where is it getting delayed. Is it a person or a policy? And then you can start seeing how the correction mechanism starts coming in. One of the best ways to make things happen, and this is where there's an effort from the government and right from the top, from the Prime Minister, the moment you bring in transparency in functioning, there's a huge element of efficiency which starts coming in. And I think that is where we are using or trying to use technology within the government to its maximum possible to make that happen. By the way, your example on the license in Delhi, I must tell you, I got mine in 3 days. And it was all in the portal. It had nothing to do with me. Okay. So it all came to my house, and it was on a fast post. I just had to pay $1,700 online because I wanted it on a speed post.
Hi, I'm Darpan Majumdar. My question to you, Professor Ufuk, is I was a little resistant to raise my hand when Jeanette asked this question that are you afraid of AI being helpful or not helpful for India? Because I don't see the word India here. I was thinking more in a global term when I am looking at this. My question to you is that there are a lot of people, especially, for example, indigenous people, tribal people, the famous C.K. Prahlad, bottom of the pyramid people, and countries, from LATAM to Eastern European to our brothers in South Asia. I am wondering that why even during COVID, I'm thinking about it like internet, COVID are the two prime examples I was thinking where the world should have been coming together. Rather than creating these islands where each one is competing with each other, I think the devastation is going to be it's going to be harakiri for me. And I'm wondering that why this is not happening. Why we are still talking about a technology in the specifics of China, India, US, as if the rest of the 194, correct me Mr. Lall, if what is the number, 194 according to the World Bank or Human Development Index, where are the rest of the countries are going to be? And I think that's conversation. And considering I was telling you that the work I do is around Center of Dialogue for Universal Consciousness, what is the reason, underlying reason, the world is still not, and the reason I'm giving you, and with that I would like you to maybe reflect, collectively we need to reflect. During COVID, I remember there are countries who are sending flights to get their citizen back. And I remember Pakistani students were saying that, please take us also. Similarly, other countries also did the same. As if it was not a global problem. It was a problem which was specific to one country. I am feeling that AI is almost like that. And this is a very terrifying time. So therefore, I neither raised my hand nor I could keep it down because it worries me that there are majority of the people are going to be already being left out. But this, whatever I could hear from 1 o'clock till 5:30, I did not hear, and it's very scary that all of the top echelons of the societies who are deciding, I did not think there was enough conversation of inclusiveness of the people or the demographic who will ever hear or ever be part of these inverted code augurs crowd.
I mean, this is, you're raising an extremely important question that, it's impossible to answer it in a just way. But, I think that the fundamental problem is that, policy is done locally. And when policy is done locally, in that case, you see a lot of, different diverse concerns. And, normally, we have a lot of studies on this showing that technology spillovers are an amazing thing because, if I drink this water, you cannot drink it anymore, right? You will be excluded from it. But if I come up with an idea, it's almost free to replicate. Everybody can learn about it, right? It's very easy. So that's why we should be just working on the upper envelope of, findings, right? Whoever comes up with the best idea, we should just utilize it, and then we should just grow over time. But I think a lot of the time, the policies, and we have a study on this specifically. International technology spillovers have been normally very helpful for countries to grow faster. Unfortunately, a lot of the policies have been more focusing on internal market and internal policies and in an isolated way. So that's why we have to think about domestic policies here, and domestic concerns. And by the way, different countries are struggling with completely different problems. Like, we have a lot of different studies, and when we see, what are the main problems in different countries, countries are like fingerprints. They are very, very different, and their concerns are very, very different. And I think we have to think about the domestic policy when it comes to that. And whatever brings also the political support are not necessarily the argument that brings political support are not necessarily what's best for the society. So that's why whenever we think about economy, we have to also political economy associated with this. So that would be my answer.
Sorry, just on that question. When we think about inclusiveness, we think about inequality. And that's absolutely the wrong way to think about it. You should think about social mobility. To make sure, as Deepak said, the kids of underprivileged families get the equal shot at doing better than kids from privileged families, right? That's kind of the mobility that drives growth. This obsession about inequality ends up reducing growth because if you bring everyone to the same level, nobody has an incentive to grow or create or innovate. I think that's a big issue.
Yeah, okay. If may I ask, I have a very fundamental question. I think Deepak would able to answer it properly because he is from the government side and responsible for making the policy.
Can I just correct that? I've just joined the government only 10 years ago. Okay, before that I was
Right.
also in the private sector as a banker.
So my question is therefore very fundamental. We have to look at other things as well, and India is one of the water-stressed country in the world, and we are depleting our water resources very fast. So considering other indicators, ecological or economic indicators, do you think that India is ready to set up a complementary infrastructure for AI growth in India? And I think Mr. Manish can also chime in its view on that.
So I'll give you my point on that one. I think we have to do things at multiple levels. The Jal Jeevan mission is going on. By the way, it's the world's largest water sustainability mission. And you were talking about COVID. Even in the midst of COVID, when COVID started, we had that water tap getting into 30 million households in rural India, 200 total million households. September 22, when COVID ended, from 30, we had moved that number to 62. Even in the midst of the world's largest, most intensive lockdown, the pipes were being laid and the water tap was being taken to those villages. But to having said that, is it either one or the other? I don't think that would be an appropriate way to be looking at it. I think the Professor very rightfully said there are choices to be made, how much of it has to go. But I think we will have to be focusing on both sides. And currently we are in a position where we can. The resources are there to be able to take care of those elements. And there are additional enhanced resources which are coming in for the other frontier subjects, which we are willing to work on.
I'll just also add that if you utilize technology the right way or have the right kind of policies in place. I mean, recently I remember just 2 weeks ago, there was so much rain that came down in Bangalore. And people made that point that if we had the right rainwater harvesting techniques in place, it would have we could have saved enough water, right, to, again, sustain a lot of these activities for a long, long time. So, and you look at energy. Again, there are ways in which you can now utilize technology to harness clean energy. There's already strides being made in solar and wind and so on. And I talked about the example of fusion. I mean, it has that ultimate potential of giving you, because today all the energy that we are enjoying on Earth in some form or the other is derived from fusion, but fusion happening on sun. If we can make fusion happen in a controlled manner on Earth, it would lead to really, really clean, abundant form of energy because there's no radioactive waste. You get helium as a byproduct. Today, the big problem is it takes more energy to get a fusion reaction going in that lab than what you get out of it. So when do you reach that break-even point at which you get more energy out of it? At least my colleagues believe within the next 2 years, we are likely to reach that break-even point. And after that, you can start to kind of work towards making that a practical reality, making it feasible and so on. So rather than only being focused on, oh, can we afford enough energy to run all these data centers? Let's also think about how we can utilize these technologies to help us like get more abundant energy or kind of reuse the water and so on.
I think we have time for two questions, one on each side of the room. If we can start here.
Yeah, hi. My question is for Professor Ufuk and Dr. Gupta. It pertains to the economics of expanding AI data centers. Like we've all established the fact that AI needs to be adopted in order to survive in the business space today. But we are also seeing unprecedented amount of expenditure going into data centers. So my question is it absolutely essential to do so in such a large scale? Like, do we see the ROI coming back in a matter of years, or is it decades?
I mean, normally these general purpose technologies. So, for instance, one of my favorite papers in the literature has also one of my favorite titles. The title is 1974. That's it. That's the title of the paper. By Jeremy Greenwood and Mehmet Yorukoglu. And what they were showing is that, during 70s, the productivity was completely flat. There was no improvement in productivity. But in the background, there was massive IT investment. So these technologies, especially innovation-based outcomes are getting materialized over time. And, I would like to make a distinction between two types of policies. One of them is the so-called induced policies. I like to call them induced policies. The other one is the organic policies. Induced policy is if you want to create some jobs, for instance, we can just design a subsidy program and say, look, if you hire more workers, I'm going to pay 80% of the salary, 90%. They will hire, they will create more jobs. Immediately, the policy will look very impactful. But it's not the organic way of creating returns. Right? An organic way is to encourage firms to invest in new technology, to nurture the domestic talent, etc. And this takes a long, long time until the society collects the fruits. And that's exactly where the tensions are typically when it comes to policy making. For the society, what benefits in the long term is not typically getting materialized during the office of the politician. So as a result, it creates again a political economy friction. So that's why with these type of long-term technologies, there has to be patience. AI again will also probably reflect in the numbers in a very long term. I don't think the numbers. Yes, there are some studies showing that when a company adopts AI, yes, the company starts becoming more productive. But as a society, for us to benefit at the macro scale, there has to be really a long way to go. And I showed you also the small business numbers. Those businesses that are paying is less than 1%. And if we are at that level already in the case of US small businesses, imagine how long it will take for other countries to benefit. But this is going to be a slow-moving object. But what we will observe in the short term will be also very different than what we will observe in the long term. Probably we will observe more negative consequences in the short term, and probably this will even suppress the numbers in the short term, rather than making the numbers look good. But in the long term, when the markets adjust, when the price mechanism adjusts, then we will start collecting also the positive returns. Because this is, let's face it, this technology makes us more effective with the same amount of hours we are spending in the market. We have the potential of producing more. This doesn't mean that the benefits will come automatically. Don't get me wrong. The whole institutional design, etc., they have to be also taken into account. But this is a tool that will make the same number of people produce more, on paper. And then time will tell us how we will manage this market structure and how we will manage the competition and education system, etc., etc.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I mean, I would emphasize the need to look at AI not as like helping you with that fixed pie view of the world, but the growing pie. Because in the fixed pie view of the world, and we will see those elements, right, in the short term especially, that same work, right, when you start to use AI agents and so on, you need much fewer people. to do the work, and therefore companies need to hire fewer people and so on. But if you look at it the other way around, if what used to take, let's say, 200, I mean, if, let's say, to solve a problem, you in the past needed 200 people working for 2 years for so many problems, right, that there just wasn't that business case for you to make that investment. Now, if that same problem can now be solved by 2 people working for 2 weeks, and these things are beginning to happen. I'm not claiming that, oh, for every problem now there is that AI-powered solution, right, that exists, but literally that just within the last, I would say, 4 months, within this year, this calendar year, people have seen a substantial increase in the capabilities of these software development by these software code generation by these models, right? And no wonder you've seen Anthropic kind of just valuation and their business, their revenue just shoot up. So as you begin to see AI-powered kind of same problems now getting solved so much faster with so much lower amount of effort, and even on the harder side, right? I was talking about the root node problems. You're no longer going to be limited just by human capability because you will have that benefit of all these AI agents helping you turbocharge, right, your own impact. You will see a lot of those benefits. Yes, of course, there are downsides. You will see AI systems getting deployed for weapons and so on, and for whatever, cyber attacks and so on. Yeah, so we'll have to, it'll be a messy transition. We'll have to manage through all of that. But there is like so much of AI-powered kind of changes that you're going to see in the world that it would be really kind of an ostrich-like behavior, right? For us to pretend that, oh, this is too costly and let's not bother investing. You have to embrace these technologies.
Please go on,
yeah,
yes.
Okay. Well, I'll take this conversation back to kind of where we started, right? So the model of growth that you also presented and Somik also presented, that was followed in the East Asian countries where you become good at manufacturing something, you adopt a technology or infuse a technology, and then you get into innovation, right? And in the process, you manufacture for the world. And so in case of India, it's more likely that the service has to do that job, right? And Make in India, the success that we have seen has been more into high-tech manufacturing than low-cost mass employing manufacturing. So the service has to do the bulk work in this process, right? So how do you think, we can adapt this model of growth from a manufacturing lens to a service lens, and particularly given what James also pointed out, that in certain cases where you are going to solve only fundamental or deductive problems and therefore not make the jump, right? So making that jump in a service economy, and that also kind of relates to this whether we need to have our own fundamental model or can we just go with.
So, of course, in the interest of time, we've been very fast on the details of these models. But normally, when we look at the journey of these successful countries, they are building an entire ecosystem, right? It's not only about really, infusing something, but it's also building an ecosystem. Just to give you an idea, just to give you an example, which we didn't talk much, even though I had some slides on this. For instance, for technology infusion, universities play a very critical role. Scientific institutions play a very critical role. In the case of Korea, for instance, Somik mentioned that the government deliberately subsidized not innovation. They did not subsidize innovation in the beginning. They subsidized technology licensing in the beginning. But at the time, President Park also invited 14 Korean scientists around the world back to Korea, paid them, I think, if my memory is correct, more, 3 times of his own salary, just to signal how much he values science, build the scientific institutions, and then encourage them to work together with industry so that, you know, industry can be close to science, and science also works on things that are applicable to real life. And a couple months ago, I was invited to give a keynote for the 50th anniversary of one of those institutions, basically. And now, when you look at their budgets, more than half of their funding is coming from private sector projects, which creates a win-win situation, right? On the one hand, private sector is working at the frontier in terms of frontier technologies. On the other hand, these academic institutions are also receiving good amount of money, and they are paying their good salaries, they're attracting good international talents. This is just one of the examples, basically, how to build that ecosystem, you know, the infusion ecosystem. Or, you know, Switzerland is another example. They never give direct subsidy to industry. They always give matching subsidy, basically. Put $1 as a firm, I'm going to put $1 to the academia, and then you, as long as you work together, basically. So, you know, there are ways to create this synergy. And then, of course, you know, the market forces that we discussed since the beginning, basically. So there, even if it's a service sector, I think, you know, the speed can be faster in service industry because of, you know, less dependence on tangible assets, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this speed can be faster, but the ecosystem, you know, business-friendly ecosystem is really, really critical for that. And then I think, you know, then we have to leave it to you know, young generations to also come up with the best innovative ideas for them to create these new directions for the economy. There's also one quick thing I wanted to make related to the transitional dynamics. I think, you know, this AI is going to take us really through a long journey. And there we have to also keep in mind the network structure that we are living in. And there was one issue that came to our mind recently, and now, you know, with James we are also working with our team on a related thing. So there are these foundational models that are providing services, and then, you know, the application layer is using those services, and now it's very cheap, and some of them are offering also services for free. Why? Because there's also, you know, an incentive for them to lower the prices so that there are more users of it, and that way the models are getting better, right? So that's why there's also some dynamic pricing that's being involved. And this market is designed, you know, by nature it has increasing returns. We typically, you know, think about decreasing returns production functions, but here there are increasing returns, right? Because if you are larger, your models will get better. When your model get better, you will have more users. When you have more users, you will get better. Naturally, this would lead in the long term to monopolies, right? There will be natural monopolies in this market. So if there's monopoly, then we know that the prices will go up, monopoly prices will go up. Then on the application layer, you know, things won't be cheap anymore, and that's why there will be a trickle down of inefficiencies in that case. So that's why, you know, having a long-term vision, it's really important to keep the foundational layer competitive. And this brings me back again to academia as well. You know, for instance, one way to keep this layer competitive is to have also open source models, and academia will play a very, very critical role to keep the foundational layer under discipline, because it's not about those models. It's also about how much the application layer, all those small farmers or you know, the small users will pay for those services, will also be influenced potentially, you know, in the future. And that's also a transition dynamic story that I wanted to tie to the earlier question. So before I forget.
Can I just mention one thing? I think you know, there are a ton of cases where, you know, I can think of examples where AI opens up new questions, but on average, it closes down and finalizes all questions. I can think of a number of cases in which it facilitates, you know, inter-civic dialogue that can decrease, you know, polarization. On average, I can demonstrate that it increases polarization and decrease, you know. So I think one of the challenges here is with any general purpose technology, it takes time, not just because of the cycles of the machine, but because even the design of the idea of artificial intelligence basically put a target on the back of human capacity, right? And the Industrial Revolution, it wasn't just, you know, we weren't just replacing people, we were replacing systems. And so I think right now we're in this place where individuals are augmenting themselves, which actually, ironically, slows down the degree to which you can reimagine the system, because each person inside the firm is making their job look more awesome than it should look if you were going to reimagine what the functions of the firm, what the firm as a whole, what whatever that entire space of services that are being offered. So I think there's a cognitive process that is going to take time, and as people reimagine what our values are. Like, what do we actually want? Like, firms are servicing things that we have wanted historically, and for us to discover as these new surrogates kind of, automate some things, make some things more expensive, make many things cheaper, we're going to have to reevaluate what the collective functions in society that we really care about, and that's a process.
The conversation was so interesting that if it was on TV, we would have cut several of you off. But here we have the benefit of, I will come back to you. This gentleman has used his proximity to the chair, which is a political economy problem, to ask for a point on the promise that he'll be brief. But I'll come back to you.
That's okay. Thank you. My name is Surinder Singh. सवाल नहीं है, बस एक छोटा सा पॉइंटर है. बागला साहब, जो आपने कहानी बताई थी, वो झज्जर जो है, मैं शायद सुन नहीं पाया सही से. वो हरियाणा में है या राजस्थान में है? Okay. My apologies, because it appears that I got it wrong then, because there's another student of mine who's from Jhajjar, and that's the only point I had. The only thing was that maybe, if possible, could you please also talk about, when we're talking about the AI stuff, whatever your reading is about what's happening in India, about the regulation of the AI, so that it actually works for the people. What's your reading on it?
The minister made a very interesting point on that, that where regulation is concerned, for regulation... Could you talk into the microphone? We are being recorded. He made an interesting point in one of his comments just before the AI thing, that they always tilt towards less regulation, and when he was asked the specific point. And I think you're seeing that as a general philosophy within the system.
The lady there.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Anamika. I do comms for one of the programs here at UCT. It's called International Innovation Corps, and I think Lenny gave a fantastic introduction of us. So our team has a lot of fellows, and they're working with different problem statements that the governments are working across India. And every day I see them pushing the limits of Claude and ChatGPT to come up with solutions for these different problem statements, just trying to churn the best output for their stakeholders at this point. My question is actually coming from a feeling that I had a couple of weeks back while I was reading the security report put in the public domain by Anthropic. And then after a couple of weeks, I saw Mrinank resign with a very cryptic message. And the two themes that surfaced from his letter on why he's leaving Anthropic was I think the first point was him saying that AI is here to distort humanity. And the second one was security can only do so much. And that's why I'm going off into the woods. I will be reading poems. And I wish the world Claude, and I wish the world ChatGPT. So my question really here is, and I want your guidance to have that certain feeling towards those threats or these concerns that are being raised by these tech people. My question is, in India, the development sector is a labyrinth. These security concerns are at a much higher level. They will eventually trickle down. I want to know, how would that look for the Indian development sector to understand the length and breadth of these safety concerns? Because if somebody who is in charge of upholding the safety of these models, and if he's saying we can only do so much and it's dangerous, it makes me feel certain things and it might distort humanity, I don't know how my fellows are going to be feeling about this when it finally penetrates to their level. So yeah, that's my question.
Who would like to take this? Gupta.
So, see, there's no doubt these problems are real, but there's also AI-based, because once you have these cyber attacks being driven by AI, you also need now AI-based systems, right, to be responding to those. So there's a lot of that kind of work happening. And again, because a lot of times you don't see or hear about that work. So I mean, it is going to be, I mean, nobody is in a position to predict, right, how the world is going to evolve. I mean, I have been extremely concerned, right? And likewise, many of my colleagues, for instance, in Google, get extremely concerned when we hear about AI systems being used for these weapons. And yet, at the same time, I mean, at least my observation is, as we have seen proliferation of these drones and so on, we have actually seen the less powerful countries like Ukraine, like Iran, and so on, in fact, resist much more powerful adversaries with the power, right, of these systems. So a lot of times these things evolve in a very unpredictable manner. So the only thing I would say is, look, I mean, for us to say, oh, these technologies are going to be too dangerous, let's kind of stop working on them, that never works, right? I mean, in the entire history of the world, as we have kept developing technologies, somehow you can never kind of stop the march of technology. So we have to now start looking for more of these answers, also enabled by technology. And ultimately, it's also extremely important for us to keep the human values front and central, right? And them guiding how we deploy these technologies in the real world.
Apologies, if I may just wrap up this conversation. I think what's very clear is that it's a complex topic. It comes with a lot of complexity. But guess who is good at complexity? Human beings. And I think as long as we don't outsource our critical reasoning, that critical decision making, as we develop AI and as we take all sections of society along as we develop AI, it holds promise. Thank you very much for a very engaging discussion.
Come to the end of a fabulous day, rich academic discussions. I am so grateful to everyone who's made this possible. I want to especially thank all our speakers. Oops, I'm so sorry. All our speakers, Bagla ji, thank you very much. Dr. Manish Gupta, thank you so much. Professors James and Ufuk, thank you very much. Jeanette, thank you for making this possible. Somik has left, but we are so grateful to him for being here and to make it possible. Well, this idea, Ufuk and I discussed way back in December, and I'm so happy that in just few months, the stakeholders to this discussion have increased. And we feel that this discussion is going to go beyond this room. And thank you everyone for making this possible. The audience for contributing to the discussion and making this discussion even more richer. So Ufuk, this is just a beginning of an idea which we will take forward with all your support. So thank you once again. And a big thank you to my team who's worked very hard to make this possible.